16. Looking at statement 1 by itself, is it enough to answer the question? No. I've got an equation, but I've got two variables I can't solve. So statement 1 by itself is insufficient to answer the question. What does that mean? It means that A and D are out of there. We're left with answer choices B, C, and E. Now let's look at statement 2. Statement 2 by itself says 5B equals 22 minus 3A. Is that enough to answer the question? No. Again, I've got an equation, but I have two variables. I can't solve for A. That means that answer choice B is out of there. We're left with C and E. Now we look at the statements combined. Can I answer the question? Well, yes. I have two variables still, but now I have two equations. Together, that's enough for me to solve the equations and enough to tell me what A is. So the answer to the problem is C. The statements combined are sufficient.
Now that we've got a handle on data sufficiency, let's take a look at a harder question.
If s is a positive integer, is s plus 8 divisible by 4? Statement 1, s is divisible by 4. Statement 2, s plus 4 is divisible by 4.
Before we can answer this question, we have to figure out what it's actually asking for and what we already know. Let's give it a shot.
The question asks us if s plus 8 is divisible by 4. Well, we already know 8 is divisible by 4, so in order to figure out if s plus 8 is divisible by 4, we really have to figure out if s is a multiple of 4. Well, let's start with statement 1. Statement 1 tells us that s is divisible by 4. Well then, this tells us everything we need to know in order to figure out if s plus 8 is divisible by 4, so our answer is definitely either A or D. Let's take a look at statement 2. Statement 2 tells us that s plus 4 is divisible by 4. Because 4 is divisible by 4, this means that s must also be divisible by 4. Great! Each statement, distinctly, provided enough information to answer the question, so the answer must be D.
So, although the math can be a little intense, each answer choice is 100% provable. But now let's look at a slightly different animal, the verbal section. The verbal section has three kinds of question types on it: sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. The verbal section allegedly measures your ability to recognize basic rules of standard written English and to comprehend and evaluate what you read. In reality, just like the math section, it really measures your ability to take the GMAT. Unlike the math section, answer choices on the verbal are not 100% provable. What this means is that we're not necessarily going with the best answer, but the best available answer, or to put it another way, the answer which stinks the least. So when you look at the answer choices, don't look for what's right. Look for what's wrong with an answer choice and get rid of it. All right, let's start off by taking a look at a sentence correction question.
These are the most common of the verbal questions, accounting for about 40% of the section. Neither business schools nor the GMAT have come to understand how flawed a test the GMAT is.
First things first, on the sentence correction. The sentence correction gives you a sentence with all or a portion of it underlined. The answer choices give you variations on that underlined portion. Answer choice A will always be the sentence as originally written, so if there's nothing wrong with it, A is going to be your answer. Our most powerful tool on sentence correction is looking at the differences among the answer choices. So let's take a look at those differences.
To start with, there are three major groups of differences among the answer choices: neither versus either, or versus nor, and have versus has. Let's start with have versus has. Since we're saying neither B schools nor the GMAC, we're treating the subject as singular, and therefore the verb must be has. Therefore, using POE, we can get rid of A, B, and E. Now we're left with just C and D. The difference between C and D is neither nor versus either or. Well, the sentence initially said neither nor, and therefore either or changes the meaning unnecessarily. Any unnecessary change in meaning in a sentence correction question is wrong. Therefore, the answer is C.
Now that we have the basic approach down for sentence corrections, let's look at another one.
The students, who had been studying the space program, were thrilled to witness the lunar landing. A. Who had been studying the space program were. B. Whom has been studying the space program was. C. Whom had been studying the space program were. D. Who had been studying the space program was. E. Who has been studying the space program was.
Once again, if you don't spot an error right away, that's okay. We can go straight to the answer choices and look for differences among them. So let's take a look.
The first obvious difference is that answers A, D, and E say who, and answers B and C say whom.
Ah, who versus whom. Now this one's a doozy. The problem most Americans have is we think that whom is a word that only British people use, like thou or ye. Well, turns out that the big difference between who and whom is whether or not the word is a subject or an object, which is actually the same difference as between he and him. So, if you're stuck between who and whom, one great way I found to think about it is to remember that I, who, and he all have vowel sounds and are all subjects, while me, whom, and him all have M sounds and are objects. So if you can't make up your mind, try replacing who or whom with he or him instead. Let's give it a try. Would it be correct to say he had been studying the space program or him had been studying the space program? Well, besides the fact that saying him had been studying sounds a bit too much like Tarzan, since we're dealing with the subject of the verb had been studying, we need to say he, and therefore pick who instead of whom. This lets us get rid of answers B and C. We're down to 3. Great job. So now if we're stuck and need to guess, we have a 1 in 3 shot of getting it right. But we're not beaten yet. Let's take another look at those answer choices and see if we can spot any other differences among A, D, and E.
Can you spot any other differences among A, D, and E now? Well, A ends in were, while D and E end in was. Is that a relevant difference? Definitely. The difference between was and were is that was is singular and were is plural.
The grammar rule being tested here is called subject-verb agreement, and it's one of the most commonly tested errors on the GMAT. The way to crack it is to identify the subject and to make sure that it matches the verb. Singular with singular, plural with plural.
The subject here is students, which is plural. This means that we need to use the plural verb were. Therefore, we can get rid of answer choices D and E. The correct answer is A. Remember that 1/5 of the time the answer will be correct as written.
So now let's take a look at the critical reasoning questions. These account for about 30% of the verbal section.
They're based on arguments, and you're then asked to either do something to the argument or conclude something from the argument. Let's look at an example. Most Western European nations are philosophically opposed to the creation and maintenance of an elite social class. Thus, they have devoted minimal effort to the development of educational programs for gifted and talented students. These questions often revolve around a writer trying to persuade the reader about some issue. The first thing we want to figure out is what the question is asking. Here the question is asking us to find the assumption, which means something that fills in the gaps in the argument.
So let's look at the parts of an argument and how we're going to work to answer this question. The arguments on the GMAT generally consist of a conclusion, which is the author's main point, what he or she is trying to get across to you. And that conclusion is then supported by premises, the evidence the author gives as to why he or she is right. But these conclusions and premises don't always lock together in an airtight kind of way. There's usually a gap between the conclusion and the evidence offered for it. So this gap is then bridged by the assumption of the argument. This isn't something written down. It's something that the argument has to assume in order for the conclusion to be true. And that's what this question is asking us for. What's the assumption? So if we can find the conclusion and the premises and know what the gap in between them is, then we know what the assumption is going to bridge in order to connect the conclusion to the premises. Let's take a look.
So the first thing we have to figure out is what is the conclusion of the argument. In this case, we have the word thus as a cue for the conclusion, and we can figure out that it's they have devoted minimal effort to the development of educational programs for gifted and talented students. Okay, so what's the support for that? What's the evidence that the author gives? In this case, it's most Western European nations are philosophically opposed to the creation and maintenance of an elite social class. So what the heck do programs for gifted and talented students have to do with an elite social class? There's our gap. So, looking at the answer choices. A, doesn't link together the things we need to link. Eliminate it. B, looks pretty good so far. C, doesn't link together the things we're needing to link. Eliminate it. D, again, doesn't link together the conclusion and the premises. Eliminate it. E, also doesn't bridge the gap in the argument. Eliminate it. That leaves us with an answer choice of B.
So let's take a look at another critical reasoning question.
The recent discovery of a thin deposit of iridium, an element associated with meteorite impacts, in a layer of the Earth's crust dating to the late Cretaceous period, 65 million years ago, has led to a new theory of mass extinctions of species. Dr. Walter Alvarez theorizes that a huge meteorite struck the Earth's surface hard enough to throw millions of tons of dust into the atmosphere, blocking out all sunlight and causing the rapid extinction of the dinosaurs. The fossil record indicates that dinosaurs ceased to exist about 65 million years ago after flourishing for nearly 150 million years. All of the following statements, if true, would weaken the author's argument except A. The fossil record indicates that several classes of light-dependent flowering photosynthetic plants flourished continuously from 80 to 30 million years ago. B. Iridium has also been associated with the presence of volcanic matter below the crust of the Earth. C. A similar layer of deposited iridium appears in a stratum dating back 70 million years. D. No such deposit of iridium is to be found in the fossil record around the end of the Eocene period, another period of mass extinction. E. A close look at the fossil record indicates that, contrary to popular belief, the dinosaurs died out gradually over the course of 2 million years.
Okay, so what's the gap in this argument? Well, the conclusion is about the extinction of the dinosaurs, and the premise is about this thin deposit of iridium. And what do those two things have to do with each other? Exactly. The gap is that the mere presence of iridium neither conclusively proves that there was this big giant meteor, nor that this big giant meteor crashed into Earth and therefore killed the dinosaurs. So now that we know what the gap is, let's take a closer look at the question.
All of the following statements, if true, would weaken the author's argument except. This question is asking us which of the answer choices doesn't weaken the author's claim. Well, now that we know what the gap in the author's reasoning is, let's look at the answer choices. A. The fossil record indicates that several classes of light-dependent flowering photosynthetic plants flourished continuously from 80 to 30 million years ago. This answer choice shows that plants that needed light were still around at the time of the dinosaurs' extinction. But I thought that dust from the meteorite blocked out all the light. So if there was enough light for plants, then maybe there was enough for light for dinosaurs also. Does this make you less likely to believe the author's argument? Yep. So I guess that it weakens it. Eliminate A. B. Iridium has also been associated with the presence of volcanic matter below the crust of the Earth. If iridium is also associated with volcanoes, then there's nothing special about meteorites, and thus we have no reason to believe that just because there is this iridium layer, there must have been a meteorite. There goes the proof for Dr. Alvarez's theory. Because B weakens the argument, eliminate it. C. A similar layer of deposited iridium appears in a stratum dating back 70 million years. If answer choice C is true, then there were other iridium layers during the time when the dinosaurs were around. Then the presence of iridium doesn't conclusively prove that there was a meteorite. Thus, we can eliminate C. D. No such deposit of iridium is to be found in the fossil record around the end of the Eocene period, another period of mass extinction. Choice D says that there were other extinctions without iridium deposits. But wait, did the argument say that all extinctions, or even most, were caused by meteorites? No. The argument only said that one particular extinction was caused by a meteorite. This doesn't really have to do with the argument. Because we're looking for the answer choice that doesn't weaken the argument, let's hold on to it. E. A close look at the fossil record indicates that, contrary to popular belief, the dinosaurs died out gradually over the course of 2 million years. If dinosaurs died out over 2 million years, then that doesn't sound like a sudden extinction caused by a cataclysmic event such as a meteorite impact. Eliminate E. So using process of elimination, because we've gotten rid of everything else, D must be the answer.
Okay, now let's talk about the reading comprehension questions on the verbal section. Yay, reading comp! The same thing you've seen on every standardized test since you were a little tiny kid. The most important thing to understand about reading comp is that it's not how you read in day-to-day life. In everyday life, when you're reading a passage, you're trying to figure out, what do you think? Do you agree with the author? Do you disagree? That's not what we're looking for on reading comp on the GMAT. On the GMAT, the question is, what did the passage say? So the strategies that most people adopt in terms of reading comprehension, where they read the whole passage carefully and then they try and answer all the questions from memory, aren't the most effective. What you want to do instead is to read for the big idea. Just figure out what the passage is about, what the author says about that, and what are the pieces of the passage. Then, when you go to the questions, translate the question into your own words. In other words, paraphrase what the question is saying so that you know what you're looking for. Take it out of the language of GMAT and put it into American. And then go back to the passage. I cannot stress this enough. You want to go to the passage, find the answer choice or the information that answers that particular question and put that into your own words. Now, why do I keep saying to put everything in your own words? Because the right answers on the GMAT are going to be answer choices which have the same idea as the passage, but in new words. The attractive distractor answers that are wrong are going to be a new idea, something the passage doesn't say, but in the same words you just read in the passage. So those are the ones that you want to POE. Get rid of them. So, to recap, read for the big idea. Don't spend a lot of time trying to learn the passage. Any time you spend learning something that's not asked about is wasted. Then, translate the question into your own words. Go back to the passage. Find the information that answers it and put that into your own words. Only then are you ready to go into the answer choices and get rid of the ones which have a new idea, something not in the passage, but the same words as the passage. Pick the answer choice that has the same idea as the passage, only in new words. There's really only two reasons an answer choice is going to be wrong on a reading comp question. First, the passage didn't say that, or second, that choice doesn't actually answer the question. You get rid of those, POE is your bestest friend on the verbal, and you're going to see score improvements pretty much right away. So, we've looked at sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. That's everything on the verbal section.
The analytical writing assessment. All right, we're almost done. The analytical writing assessment is, you could say, the least important portion of the GMAT because the 0 to a 6 score is not going to be considered in your overall 200 to 800 GMAT score. However, business schools may look at your essay score, so it's important that we talk about it. So let's talk about each of the essays that you'll be seeing. You'll be given 30 minutes for each essay with an optional 10-minute break in between. The first essay that you'll receive will be an analysis of an issue. You'll be presented with an issue in which you have to give your position and back it up with supporting evidence and examples. Now, the trap that a lot of essay writers fall into is that they spend way too much time trying to think of the perfect examples and run out of time at the end. Now, of course, spend a couple of minutes outlining your essay at the beginning, but quickly go into the essay, give a firm position, and give your evidence, and just have a conclusion. In a lot of ways, the structure is a lot more important than just content. Now, in your analysis of an argument essay, you'll be presented with an argument. And in a lot of ways, it's just like that argument section that you saw, or argument questions that you saw in the verbal section. You have to identify the conclusion and the premises, and then figure out what the gaps are in between. So a lot of traps, once again, that essay writers fall into is that they feel that they have to somehow give an opinion on the argument, but that's not the case. Your job as an essay writer is to find the inherent flaws and point them out. So those are the two essays. Business schools are more interested in just seeing that you have some sort of a good level of English communication skills rather than seeing like perfect sixes for the essays. So if you get like a 3.5 or 3.5 to a 4 essay score, that's great. The GMAT's role in the admissions process. Obviously, your GMAT score plays an important part in your admission to the B school of your dreams. However, there are other parts of the picture that you have to consider. So let's look at some of the objective and subjective factors that play a part in your admission to the business school of your dreams. What do I mean by objective factors? Objective factors include numbers, such as your GMAT score and your undergraduate GPA. Subjective factors include your personal statements, work experience, letters of recommendation, and extracurricular activities. So let's talk about some of the more important components in the objective and subjective factors list. So you know that the objective factors, the numbers, are important. They're going to be used as a sorting mechanism to weed out some applicants. All right, for the subjective factors, business schools will be more interested in looking at your work experience than purely your academic career. So if, say for instance, you have two candidates. One candidate is fresh out of undergrad and they have a 4.0 GPA, great student, but absolutely no work experience. On the other side, we have candidate B. Now, they may have a slightly lower GPA, say a 3.6 to a 3.7, but they've had, since their graduation, 4 to 5 years of extensive and challenging work experience. Business schools will be more compelled to accept candidate B rather than candidate A. So make sure in your resume you outline all the different work experiences, the challenges that you overcame in the years